All right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of How to Get Away with Staffing. My name is Colin LeBeau, president of Foxhire. We're an employer of record platform supporting staffing and recruiting professionals here in the U.S. And globally. I've got some people from my team, Jessica Arby, our director of HR, and John Lindesmith, our VP of product. And we're going to talk about how to build a back office. So it's what we do, and a lot of people don't have a lot of insights into how it operates. So we thought we would share with everybody. And today's topic is insurance. Fun stuff, right, guys? Insurance is the best.
Absolute
Right.
best.
Definitely one of the most expensive things, and not the funnest thing to spend money on, but I think something that everybody knows the importance of and has seen the increasing costs on, right? I think insurance is going up across the board in almost every channel, whether it's direct to consumer or B2B, right? Like, Jess, how you're seeing insurance costs rise everywhere, no?
Yeah, we've seen increase like on the health insurance side, kind of year over year, sometimes big, sometimes not so big, but it definitely has been going up. Workers' comp is another one. I mean, we've had a couple of good years where it's, not had too much of an increase, but there have been years past where, it's pretty substantial and we had to kind of do some backbends and figure out how we could, change it and look at other options that make it a little bit more affordable. So yeah, they're definitely going up.
Yeah. And I'd love to have some people sort of learn where you're getting a lot of this knowledge, Jess. So I know if you're a subscriber to the podcast so far, 7 episodes in, you might know John and I, but I'm not sure that, Jess, you've been able to sort of explain where a lot of this data comes from and that you bring to the table on the HR side. So if you wouldn't mind just sort of explaining, how did you get into the insurance world as a part of your HR career, and what are some of the things you've maybe managed or helped support?
Yep. So I started 20 some years ago in the safety side of things of HR. So that's where my background was originally in, was, safety, employee safety, worksite safety, that sort of thing. And it's kind of transitioned over the years into a lot of like risk management, business insurance, that sort of thing. And also, the whole HR side of it with employee health benefits and, health insurance. So a big, arc over those 20 years that has a lot of insurance, risk management, and all things, liability related. Yeah. So, and it's been a really great time with Foxhire, just kind of learning the whole other side of things with, all the different businesses that we work with, what the expectations are, that sort of thing. And then also just the multitude of different types of employees that we have working at those work sites and how we need to accommodate them too. So yeah, it's been really great.
Awesome. Yeah, that's amazing. And I think one of the main questions we get a lot of times when we start talking about insurance comes from our recruiting agencies that want to work with us to do a contract staffing agreement. And one of the agreement requirements is a certificate of insurance. And that's where we usually reach out to you, Jess. So what is a certificate of insurance, or COI for short? You might hear that term when talking to a buyer of staffing services. So what's a COI, Jess?
Right. Yep. So the certificate of insurance is really just a document, piece of paper, PDF, whatever, that kind of explains to a potential client all of the different types of insurances that we carry for our business, to protect our business, and also, in turn protect them, as an additional insured. So a lot of times clients will specify what they would like to see on the certificate of insurance. Does it align with what we have? And this is all kind of provided in the contract, asking for, the different limits of insurance. And, so we just kind of work with them to make sure that we're aligned. And any clients that we work with, we have a certificate of insurance that kind of covers them. And we share them every year. At the beginning of the year, as we renew our policies, we go back and make sure that all of our clients have updated renewed certificates of insurance each year.
Hmm. Got it. So it's basically like a document that tells people you carry insurance and like certifies that, hey, this company is carrying the right protection for whatever areas they want protected. And I know
Especially,
John, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, especially like it does, and it shows the limits on there too, like Jess said. So, as you're building up your back office, which is kind of the theme of the episode, knowing the limits that you're going to be required to carry, which like changes all the time, and those limits, like the minimum thresholds that they're requiring as your clients are trying to grow, are definitely increasing, as well as the cost of insurance too. So like that's been one of the biggest change I've seen over the past 8 or so years. Is like they're requiring so much insurance, so your limits are going up, so you're constantly updating those COIs and getting new ones so you can continue to do business with all the clients that you need to do business with.
Right.
Yeah, when you say limits, let's just be clear.
Yes.
What do limits mean exactly if you're like just a complete newbie to insurance and COIs?
So the limits would be like, as an example, like with general liability, having $1 million per incident as a coverage limit, and then also having a $3 million limit for like things in the aggregate, things, that are kind of building and, things like that. With cyber, that's one of the ones that we see a lot of times where, it just keeps kind of increasing every year. Like clients' expectations are, finding that, as things happen and things get more expensive, insurance goes up too.
Right. And I know John and I just spoke about what to expect with working with MSP, managed service providers, or VMSs.
Yeah.
And I know limits are really important, I think, in those engagements. John, why would you say limits are important there if you're maybe going into one of those for the first time and they ask you for a COI?
You definitely you have to be able to hit their limits that they require, or they won't allow you to do business, the MSP or the VMS.
Yeah.
And I think part of their job as a service provider to their clients is to make sure that, all of the risk they can take away from the clients and the cost that they can take away from the clients, that they're going to try to do that. So I think VMSs and MSPs historically, we've seen much higher limits than other clients that don't use those service providers, as a way of adding like additional protection for the people that are using those service providers. So if you do submit a certificate of insurance to those programs and they don't have the limits that they're looking for, you probably are going to get rejected right off the bat without them even looking into any part of your other qualifications that you might have. So it becomes very important to be able to hit those limits.
Yeah, and that's what we see a lot of our customers come to us for, is just because we carry a lot of the insurances that not everybody carries or thinks about. So what are some of those insurance types? Let's just start with that. What are some of those insurance types that clients of staffing services are asking for to be included on that COI? Like what should they be thinking about if you're maybe building a back office for the first time and thinking about calling an insurance broker?
Workers' comp is going to be number one because that's required. It's a state mandated requirement. Some of the other ones would be like professional liability, general liability, EPLI, which is employment practices liability insurance. Cyber is another really big one that we see. It never even was a thing probably 10 years ago on a COI, and now it's huge. Umbrella, having an umbrella plan policy that covers, a lot of those other things. It's kind of like the above and beyond that limit. Say, for example, like we talked about the GL, general liability, being 1 million and 3 million, the umbrella would sit over top of that and cover anything that kind of goes beyond that 3 million limit there.
Yep. Yeah, and I know when talking to staffing professionals, they're not always thinking about all of those. Like I know cyber is like one that not everybody thinks about, but it's certainly growing.
We didn't even have that a couple years ago. Like not
Yeah.
us personally, but that wasn't even like a requirement that people had a few years
No.
ago. Now all of a
Right.
sudden here we are, and cyber's like
$5 million
Jess said,
limit.
yeah, the most expensive one of them all. Like go
Yeah.
figure. But
It's
that's the
wild.
world we live in.
it's a lot of that just hacks and ransomware stuff, attacks, and all those types of things are hitting a number of the staffing vendors, or like in the ecosystem of staffing. There's people that have been hit, and there's a lot of sensitive data in the staffing world, employment data, stuff that you need to gather to employ people is also extremely valuable to hackers and people that want to take advantage of there. So protecting that data is really important. You're also theoretically, when you're in a staffing engagement, allowing an employee of another organization, meaning either the staffing firm or employer of record, to come into your organization and use your systems. And therefore, they could also put your data at risk, and they may not be an employee of your organization. So they want that person's actions covered under insurance to ensure that in signing up for staffing services, they don't also put themselves at greater risk than they already were previously. So there's a lot of that. But I think the one that most recruiting and staffing agencies ask about, or MSPs and VMSs ask about, is workers' comp. There's a lot of nuances in workers' comp, different ways to go get it. Different states handle it differently. So let's start with that. Like, there are some states that handle it differently than all the other states. I think there's a few that you would call what they call monopolistic states. What is that? What is a monopolistic state?
So a monopolistic state would be a state that requires employers to insure their workers' comp through the state. So you have no option to go out and get your own private workers' comp coverage. It's usually the states are kind of competitive. So that's like their angle, is that they're, competitive enough, for private insurance, but there really aren't the same options. So those states would be like Ohio is one. We're located in Ohio, so Ohio's one that we're very familiar with. North Dakota, Washington, and Wyoming are all the only four monopolistic states. And then the non-monopolistic states would be all the other states. So in all of the other states, you're able to go and get a private insurance policy. Some, employers may also still be through the state. There is state coverage, that's mandated, but that's usually the most expensive coverage in those non-monopolistic states where you can get private coverage. A couple of other options that, you could use instead of private insurance might be like self-insurance. If you have the, large employer status and good financials and things like that, you may be afforded the opportunity to be self-insured in any of the states, really. Another option in the states where you can get private insurance would be to go with a captive rather than, just a general private insurance policy. You can, potentially join a captive. So there are, requirements that you have to meet to join the captive, but ultimately what it is bringing multiple similar employers into a group, just for, more buying power, being able to receive those benefits of having larger numbers and, lower rates when you do that. So that's always a good potential option, especially in our industry in staffing.
Yeah, there's a lot of captives in staffing, and there's even captives that are more specific to certain industries like healthcare and vice versa. Because that's the thing with workers' comp, is not all workers' comp is the same, right? Workers' comp for employees that do office work is way less expensive than workers' comp for employees that do manufacturing work or healthcare work. And so having a group of buyers that are in the same areas can help increase that buying power to enable you to afford the workers' comp that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get individually. So let's say you are a staffing firm and you have a workers' comp claim. What happens with that? How does a workers' comp claim process typically go if you staffed an employee at, let's say, a hospital?
So there are a couple things with the claim part of it. The worker is our employee. They're covered by our workers' comp policy. So, we would, manage that whole process. We connect with that worker, make sure that their, incident is taken care of, that they get the claim reported to the insurance company, and that the whole process kind of goes from there. the end client, the host employer is not responsible for anything related to the workers' comp claim, the cost of it, if there's lost time or anything like that. So we work, through our insurance company and our third-party administrator to kind of manage the claim, and deal with the employee. The only other thing, though, that I would say as a caveat to that, when it comes to the OSHA side of things, the host employer is actually responsible for reporting on their OSHA 300 log any accidents that occur on their work site. So that's why it's very important for us to stay in touch with that end client, the host employer, to make sure that they have the information that they need to be able to, track all that information on their annual OSHA 300 log.
Gotcha. Interesting. Okay. So if I'm a staffing firm and I do have a claim on my policy, it's going to probably drive my costs up, right? So do I bill the client for that or no? Is that something that you usually do, John?
Not normally, and it usually sits on your particular workers' comp policy for a number of years. Is it 5 years, I think, Jess, or can it be longer in some cases?
Yeah, usually the experience period is a 5-year window. Yeah.
And that experience period is sort of what's measuring how good of a insurance buyer you are, meaning how many claims do you have. And so if your claims history gets bad, your costs go up, or they just say, hey, we're not going to insure you anymore.
Yes.
Which for a staffing firm can mean you're going out of business because you can't not have workers' comp and still offer staffing services.
Exactly.
So that's an important insurance coverage to have.
Yes. What also makes doing your due diligence in buying your workers' compensation policy and approving your roles really important, because some roles have more riskier types of like jobs that they're performing. And, if you get one claim, like Jess just mentioned, you're in a lot of trouble for 5 years. So it only takes one. So you have to be very careful with, the policy that you have, as well as what jobs you're actually approving to work.
And since you're putting these people at a third-party client, it's also very important which clients you work with, because if your clients are putting your workers at risk, they're pushing all of that risk upon you as the staffing vendor rather than themselves, which is a little bit of the reason why they come to a staffing vendor in the first place, is to mitigate that risk. And sometimes that risk they're really focused on is workers' comp risk, right? Same goes for all the other insurance policies, though. That's one of the reasons people use an employer of record or a staffing firm, is to mitigate that risk. And another risk that they try to mitigate for is, professional liability. So when people hear that term, especially people that aren't familiar with insurance, they may not really know, what does that mean? So Jess, what would professional liability be for, or what would it cover?
So professional liability is also known as errors and omissions coverage, which sometimes you might hear those used interchangeably, but basically it, covers things like any kind of negligence or, issues with malpractice or, things like that. Think of it in terms of like, attorneys or healthcare workers or, engineers. That's when professional liability a lot of times can come into play. The other part of professional liability is that you want to make sure when you're setting this up that you also include any kind of special endorsements. So like if you're a staffing company, you'll want to make sure that you have a staffing endorsement on your professional liability, because it's not a normal employment. It's, you're kind of employing for someone else. And so you have to have that staffing arrangement endorsement on there. Same thing with like healthcare, making sure you have an allied healthcare endorsement, or legal services if you're employing attorneys or paralegals, that sort of thing. There are a lot of different endorsements that you want to make sure that you have those included, depending on what type of work you're going to be employing. And so professional liability covers things like, the legal fees and court costs, and, if there's a settlement in the case, or, something like that, if a claim, does come to light.
Right. So it's more like protecting the outcome of people doing their jobs incorrectly, right? It sounds like, and that could cause a damage of some kind, so as an example, like if you're a nurse, say I staffed a nurse and they're bedside and something happens bad to, to the patient that they're working with, that would potentially be covered under professional liability if they had been under a policy that had both professional liability and a healthcare endorsement.
That's right.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that's also an important thing to have too, because I think, again, you're not going to be able to bill your client for any of these things.
Right.
Yeah. So big time risk mitigation there for the client as well, especially in those higher risk professions like legal, healthcare, education, where the stakes are a lot higher.
Those are also unique in that, we hold our professional liability as the employer, but sometimes those higher level professionals are also holding their own just for
Yep.
extra protection, which
Right.
isn't always the case. So, if you're thinking about building your back office and you're looking into those types of roles, you want to make sure you have a compliance team that can, make sure that you're approving the correct roles and that those workers are holding the proper, certifications and, insurance that can protect themselves as well as protecting your company at the same time. So that's kind of a unique situation. That's not the case in many other the insurance things that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah. Which type of roles do you think would do that?
Like I could think of doctors, surgeons, definitely attorneys would be one of those. So like I always think of like higher level healthcare as like the top one,
Like
but
locum
anyone
tenens,
in like a what do you say?
like locum tenens.
Locum tenens, potentially C-level roles, a lot of those higher, like dependent regardless of the company, they'll also have their own professional liability on top of it.
Yeah.
Um,
And I
so
would even say, like, we see it with even like physical therapists and occupational therapists in schools working with, disabled children. Like that's one big one that we see often too. So there's a lot of times where that comes into play.
Yeah, I think we also see it a lot with like independent contractors, right? 1099 independent contractors will carry their own insurance because they
Yeah.
are their own business,
definitely.
so they need to be carrying it also. So it's like multiple layers of insurance here going on if you were going to staff a 1099 as an example, which is interesting. So then how does that differ from general liability? Like professional liability, general liability, what are the differences?
So general liability covers more of like, like physical injuries or property damage, things that like, if one of our workers, caused some kind of issue at the facility that caused even, damage to systems or equipment, that sort of thing. Like, so say one of those nurses damaged some very expensive equipment or something like that, it would be something that the client may reach out to us to file a claim for.
Got it. So if a tech worker messes up a data center or something like that, and it needs to be repaired, that might be covered under general liability.
Yeah, I would say in that case, if it's like something that's like physical damage,
Yeah.
yes. But if it's like, so it may kind of like go
Cyber,
in more
too.
cyber potentially.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the insurance carriers will start pointing their fingers at each other. They're like,
Yes.
no, you have to pay. No, you have to pay, right? And they'll try to fight that battle.
Yep.
Nice segue.
Yeah, cyber. Cyber is really interesting, probably becoming one of the most asked for, like you talked about, very expensive. We just saw the Change Healthcare cyber attack where they were ransomed for $3 million or so, and Change Healthcare had to pay them in Bitcoin. And that was holding up a ton of insurance payments for things like Medicare, Medicaid, and a lot of the health systems weren't getting paid by those insurance payers. So it's definitely happening out there. And, if you're just a small staffing or recruiting agency, you may not be thinking about cyber insurance as something you need to have, but it seems like you might, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
So
I
what
mean,
would cyber cover?
it can be crippling. We also have seen that recently with, I think it's the state of Kansas right now has all of their background check stuff kind of in limbo, and their work because of a cyber attack that they've been dealing with since I think October. So we're finally starting to see the background checks trickling in that have been outstanding for all that time, the whole entire state's database. Yeah,
Come on, Kansas.
Yeah. Things that are covered by cyber, well, there's a lot of things. So it's like security and, things like that, data breaches, whatever. I mean, there's just like, it depends on what your cyber policy says. So there are things that you may or may not want to include in that too.
Yeah. So basically anything like ransomware, cyber attacks, where they shut down your systems or they steal data, things of that nature. What I always thought was really cool about cyber insurance is the support you get if you were to have an instance. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like the support you'd get if something happened, right? So like, I think Jess, when we were talking to the people that provide ours, they provide like a whole team of people to come in and like manage the response.
Right. Yep. So we have our own like internal process, to make sure that we are doing what we need to do on our end, but we do have a close connection with our insurance company too. So they provide a lot of services for walking us through and making sure, as we go through and defend ourselves through this problem that we end up getting, when we have a breach or, something like that. They, help us through that process.
Yeah, that's really what you're paying for. Like if you do get a cyber insurance policy, you're really paying for, yes, the financial support, but also like the guidance around how to, get all of the pieces of the puzzle back together, because there's systems information that was maybe taken or things of that nature. And that's actually really interesting. Which if you're not a tech company, now we are a tech company, so we have a lot of control over that. But if you're not a tech company, you're just a staffing or recruiting agency, it's possible that, you'd want to have that type of support, right? And so that's a really, really interesting insurance coverage that it is emerging and newer in the market.
And the
So,
internal procedures important on a number of reasons too, because clients require that a lot of times, that you have a security team or security departments that can lead those responses. But also, I believe to even get cyber insurance, like you have to have certain requirements that'll let you buy that insurance as well as renew that insurance, like when the renewals are coming. So, like building out that internal infrastructure is really important, because one, your clients are going to be demanding it, and two, if you don't have that internal team and process in place, then you're not even going to be able to get the insurance anyway. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, that's really important. The whole process of applying for cyber coverage is lengthy. I mean, there are a lot of questions. So you'll want to make sure that you have, a good team that can really understand the information there, and that they, know what is being asked, so that you can get the coverage that you need. Because it's
yeah,
not easy to get. Like there are times where companies struggle to even obtain cyber coverage.
crazy amount of data transfer just to prove that we are worthy of our coverage, And so if you're trying to get into one of those big MSP VMS programs, or even a client that's sophisticated buyer staffing and they require that, it's gonna be very hard without cyber insurance. So yeah, that's why a lot of customers come to an EOR in general, is because of that one component. But the other component they come to an EOR for, or just an insurance broker in general, is health insurance. So, and there's a lot of regulation around health insurance that sort of drives that, specifically the Affordable Care Act. So staffing firms have to ensure that they meet those ACA requirements. And that is a big burden on staffing firms. So can you talk a little bit about like what ACA requires of any employer, Jess?
Yeah, so employers are required by the Affordable Care Act to make sure that you're providing minimum essential coverage and a minimum value plan to your employees, to at least, I think it's like at least 95%, meets that criteria of what is minimum essential and minimum value. It has to be offered to all employees that are working at least 30 hours a week or more. So if they're, considered 30 hours a week or more, they're full-time eligible for benefits. Hawaii is one of the only states that has less than that. Hawaii actually has a minimum of 20 hours to qualify for benefits. So that's a state requirement that's more stringent.
Yeah. Yeah. Good old Hawaii, always making things more difficult. But yeah, there's that minimum hours, right? And so it's basically full-time versus part-time that would require you to offer benefits. And then it's like, how much benefits do you need to offer, right? In layman's terms. And that's the minimum essential coverage plan and minimum value plan, which offers certain levels of coverage for certain services that your employees might need, right? So like just basic checkups and things like that to pharmacy and those types of things. And there are entire healthcare insurance products that were created to service not just the ability to support the Affordable Care Act requirements, but also staffing specifically. And so I know a lot of the staffing firms do employ those types of coverages from companies that only service really that niche. And there's a lot of them out there that do that because it is so unique in the staffing market. It really affects almost every staffing company unless you're doing more like shift-based per diem work, where your workers are probably not going to be in the 30-hour threshold range where you would need to offer benefits. But isn't there a minimum number of employees you need as well? Jess, isn't like 50 employees, or it doesn't matter how many employees you have?
I don't know that offhand.
I'm pretty sure there's a 50 employee limit, or I guess requirement, 50 employees, but we can look that up.
There definitely used to be, because I remember right when the Affordable Care Act kicked off, there were people like laying off to get under the 50 number.
Under, yeah, 49, right? I think it's like
Yeah.
50 in your local area or something like that.
Yeah, there's a big scramble like right off the bat to like track the hours, because you had to either get them under 30 to not have to
Right.
offer the benefits, or get your number under 50 so you didn't have as many employees. So
Yeah.
we got a lot of business those first few years of the Affordable Care Act because people needed insurance to offer to their employees. And an EOR, if you're set up with the minimum minimum benefits that you need to be a part of the Affordable Care Act correctly, then that was a good option for them to use.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's still the case. And so there are still a lot of staffing firms that will partner with an EOR or a PEO to enable that to be possible. So even still, though, even if it's not going to meet the ACA, there's still a lot of client organizations that want to ensure the workers that are headed to their facilities have a good employee experience and they can retain that talent. And part of that is the benefits piece. So a lot of staffing firms are just starting to either partner with EORs or get health insurance that is over and above the requirements to increase their retention of those staff members, because the job market is so tight right now, right? There's a lot, the unemployment rate is very low. There's a lot of people working multiple jobs as well. So if you can retain your employees, you don't have to go find as many new ones.
It used to be an afterthought, like benefits for a while.
Right.
Like it hardly used to be anything, but like with the emergence of Gen Z now into the workforce, like the statistics that show like that they value benefits more than like any other demographic is kind of like interesting to see, especially after COVID. Like I think COVID changed that for a lot of people, that they saw the benefit of health benefits, and that's
Right.
one of the more, it kind of gained popularity through the COVID cycle, and now it's still remaining an important thing for people. So you definitely want to offer that to your employees, so yeah, you can retain that talent that you need to keep your business going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's-
Well, I mean,
it's
healthcare
definitely
costs are
something.
rising so much,
Mhm.
Yeah.
even the last 5 years, 10 years. So if you don't have health insurance and you're a person working a staffed assignment, a contract assignment, and you have an illness or a sickness or whatever you need, that is going to be a hefty burden to, tackle, given the cost of healthcare at the moment. So it's almost table stakes. Health benefits are almost table stakes for definitely Gen Z, but almost every employee out there. If you're in the United States, it's a rare occurrence to see someone not really care about it. Mostly, it's the independent contractors that are not necessarily worried about it. But if you're working a W-2 role and you're expecting to work that type of position, benefits are like table stakes. It's almost like you wouldn't even ask about it because you
Right.
just expect it to happen.
It's just automatic. Yeah. And I think it's like, it's one of those things where, you know, it's not required to add all those extra things, you know, but it's so competitive, you know, as far as like just being able to attract the best talent and then retain them. So, you know, those things like, you know, offering the MEC and MVP plans are those minimums. However, most employers really are, you know, trying to make sure that they're also offering, you know, like that major medical plan that's like a nationally known carrier, you know, so that the medical coverage, they can, you know, use that openly and freely and be able to go to the doctor that they want to go to, you know, that sort of thing. Like those are valuable to employees. And so employers now know like that's just something that you have to kind of offer. A couple of other things that, you know, are very common, like dental and vision. It's almost kind of like hand in hand with medical. But then there are a lot of those other like ancillary benefits too, that a lot of employers, you know, are just making sure they have those in their packages because that's the expectation, you know, includes like the short-term disability, long-term disability, life insurance, an employee assistance program has just really been taking off. A lot of people are expecting that. It includes things, you know, like with behavioral health and, you know, having access to counseling and things like that through your EAP. Other like voluntary plans, life, additional voluntary life is another big one. A lot of people expect to have that now. Accident and critical illness is another big one that we see a lot that people are looking for.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you just need those things if you're going to want to retain your talent. And for like mature contingent workforce programs that are hiring a lot of contingent workers, that's a big thing now. If you want to not spin your wheels as much and lose those contingent workers to other assignments and other employers, is to have a legitimately strong health benefits program for those that maybe aren't W-2 employees of your organization, but that are, you know, you're working with through any number of partners like a staffing firm or an employer of record or a gig platform, right? So we're seeing a lot more of those employers partnering with those that deliver those benefits because it typically works out to reduce costs on the long term because you're not having to go resource another person or people to replace those that want to go find better benefits elsewhere. So for it to be such table stakes, it's so interesting because of all the work that goes into renewing your benefits program or getting benefits for the first time. It is a massive undertaking. It is not a small feat to go and execute on that. It's something that companies work on all year long to prepare for. So it's funny that that's like table stakes for those like, oh, just check the box, duh, you have benefits, because it's such a difficult thing to get and do right.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. So that's like the 10th insurance product we've talked about so far. And if you're a staffing firm or a recruiting agency or an employer in general, this might be a heavy thing to think about. If you're just starting or you're trying to improve that, just learning about it. So, you know, one step at a time. There's a lot more pieces of the back office you need to make sure you have in place before you think about benefits as well. It's just one component. So we're going to be doing a series on this, building a back office, and this is just the first concept to think about. So a lot to take in there. Thank you guys so much for your time and input. We hope you guys found that valuable. We'll see you next time on How to Get Away with Staffing. Thanks.
Thanks.